My husband's mistress announced pregnancy at our anniversary. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. My husband was cutting our anniversary cake when his pregnant mistress raised a champagne glass. For one strange second, nobody in the private dining room moved. The string lights over the rooftop terrace glowed gold. The violin playlist I had spent an hour curating kept drifting through the speakers, and Daniel still had one hand on the silver cake knife, like we were in the middle of a posed photograph. Then the woman by the bar placed her palm over the curve of her stomach and smiled at him with the confidence of somebody who had been promised a future. "I think," she said, lifting her glass, "it's time everyone knew why Daniel's life is about to change. My name is Sophia Bennett. I was 35 that night. 10 years into a marriage I had been trying to save so carefully it felt like carrying glass down a staircase. I taught 11th grade English at a public high school, which meant I spent my days explaining subtext to teenagers and somehow missed it in my own house. Daniel was the polished one, the man who knew which wine to order and how to shake hands like cameras were always nearby. He talked big. I remembered birthdays, prescriptions, and which side of the bed he slept better on when he was stressed. Our 10th anniversary dinner was supposed to be proof that we were bruised, not broken. I had booked the terrace room at Marlowe House, the place where he proposed after pretending we were only meeting for dessert. I ordered white ranunculus because they were in my bouquet at our wedding. I even had the bakery recreate the lemon thyme cake from that day. I had spent 2 weeks planning a night I hoped would remind him who we had been before work, silence, and disappointment turned every conversation into a negotiation. Instead, 32 people watched another woman announce she was carrying my husband's child. Daniel's face didn't go white the way guilty people look in movies. It did something worse. It tightened, like he was irritated by bad timing. "Vanessa," he said, too softly, as if I wouldn't hear him. "Not here. Not that isn't true. Not I don't know this woman. Not even Sophia. Please let me explain. Just not here." And that was when I realized she thought she belonged there. From the outside, our marriage looked solid because people confuse quiet with healthy. Daniel and I met at a friend's 4th of July cookout when I was 24 and sunburned and holding a paper plate of watermelon. He told me later that I was the first woman who looked at him like he didn't need to perform. At the time, that felt romantic. Years later, I understood it was also a clue. He loved being admired, but he loved being managed even more. In the early years, we built something that felt ordinary in the best way. We rented a small duplex with crooked floors. We argued about dish towels. We saved for vacations by cooking at home. When Daniel started climbing at his firm, he worked late, and I covered the life behind him without making a ceremony of it. I mailed his mother birthday gifts with both our names on the card. I stayed up to edit speeches he gave at charity dinners, so he sounded generous without sounding rehearsed. People think marriages collapse in loud moments. Mine really started changing in the quiet administrative ones. 2 years before the anniversary dinner, I was offered a department chair track at my school. It would have meant more money, longer hours, and eventually a role I had wanted for years. Daniel kissed my forehead and said, "Take it if you want. We'll figure it out." But we meant me. We had been trying to get pregnant, and every specialist appointment, blood draw, and insurance appeal already lived on my calendar, not his. So I turned the promotion down. I told myself I was choosing us over resume lines. Daniel called me selfless in front of friends like it was the highest compliment a wife could earn. By our 10th anniversary, we had become the couple people envied for the wrong reasons. We still hosted holidays. We posted smiling vacation photos. But in private, there was an ache under everything. He touched me less. He laughed at his phone more. He said he was exhausted in a tone that implied I was childish for wanting more than cohabitation. A month before the dinner, I asked, "Are we actually okay, or are we just good at looking okay?" He stared at the ceiling. "Soft. Not everything is a crisis." It should have comforted me. Instead, it sounded like a door closing. I just didn't know who he was closing it for. I can still list the warning signs now like inventory, which is one of the more humiliating parts. Nothing was dramatic enough to justify a scene on its own. That was what made it so effective. Daniel changed his phone passcode in March after 10 years of using the same 6 digits. When I laughed and asked if he'd joined a witness protection program, he smiled without looking up and said, "My client data is sensitive now." He started going to a gym 20 minutes farther away even though we lived 3 blocks from a perfectly good one. He bought new shirts and cared suddenly, almost tenderly, about his hair. At first I read it as midlife vanity, the harmless kind. Then there were the absences that came wrapped in professional language. Board dinner, investor drinks, networking thing, boring crowd. He came home smelling not like perfume exactly, but like expensive hotel soap, that neutral clean scent designed to erase evidence rather than leave it. Once, when he hugged me hello, I found a faint streak of makeup on the collar of his navy coat. He looked down at it and said, immediately, probably from Elaine. She air-kissed me before the fundraiser. I wanted to believe him so badly that I hated myself for noticing it again later. There were credit card charges I couldn't place. $287 at a furniture store in a suburb we never visited, $43 for tolls on a road Daniel never took to work, late-night rideshare receipts when he claimed he drove himself. I asked once, lightly, "Are you secretly living a second life?" And he laughed just enough to make me feel silly. "Babe, if I were having fun, you'd know. I come home to budget spreadsheets and prenatal vitamins." That line sat in me wrong for days. We weren't even on prenatal vitamins then. We were in the awful holding pattern after our second fertility consult, when everything was supplements, lab work, and patience disguised as hope. I told myself he misspoke because he was tired. I told myself his distance came from shame, not betrayal. I told myself grown women did not blow up marriages over vibes, toll receipts, and one wrong sentence. Then I saw a clinic charge attached to our joint card. Because I was an English teacher and not a detective, I did what women like me are trained to do when the story stops making sense. I revised the tone and kept planning the event. Our anniversary dinner became my private act of optimism. If you had asked me then whether I was trying to save my marriage with candlesticks and menu cards, I would have denied it. But that is exactly what I was doing. I told Daniel I wanted something small and elegant, just family and a few close friends. He said, "Whatever makes you happy," in the distracted voice of a man answering email while pretending to listen. I took that as permission to do all the work myself. I chose the rooftop terrace because wine had ripped my veil there 10 years earlier, and Daniel had laughed so hard he cried. I wanted to put us back inside that version of ourselves for one night. I hand-lettered place cards on thick ivory stock after grading essays at midnight. I asked the chef to make Daniel's favorite short rib. I tucked battery candles into glass hurricanes because the terrace lighting was flattering but dim. On the afternoon of the dinner, I stood in our kitchen in a silk navy dress and watched Daniel knot his tie. "You look beautiful," he said automatically. "Do I look beautiful?" I asked. "Or do I look like the woman who planned your evening?" That got a real smile out of him, brief and charming. "Both. Don't start a fight before dessert." I almost did. Instead I laughed, fixed his cuff, and told myself not to waste the rare softness. By 7:30 the room was humming. Elaine was seated near the window, speaking in that low, controlled voice that made every sentence sound like a verdict. Tessa arrived with a bottle of red and squeezed my hand twice. "Our code for you okay?" Daniel was in his element, floating from table to table, touching shoulders, refilling glasses, thanking everyone for coming as if he had organized the thing himself. The cake sat in the back on a silver stand under white ranunculus. Our guests were warm. The city below us looked forgiving. For the first time in months, I let myself believe maybe this night could become a turning point instead of a memorial. Then the hostess leaned toward me and whispered there's a woman downstairs insisting Daniel invited her. I remember every physical detail of the next 2 minutes. The condensation slipping down my water glass. The soft scrape of a chair as Elaine turned. The way Daniel's smile vanished not in surprise, but in recognition. Vanessa didn't storm in. That would have been easier to categorize. She entered like someone joining a delayed reservation, one hand resting on the doorframe, the other curved over her stomach. She was younger than I expected, in a fitted cream dress under a camel coat. She carried an envelope and wore the calm expression of a woman who had practiced not blinking. The room went almost silent except for one friend's nervous laugh. Daniel crossed half the room toward her. "Vanessa," he said under his breath, but not low enough. "What are you doing?" She looked past him at me, then at the cake. "Honestly, I thought tonight was the right time to stop pretending." Then she lifted a champagne glass from a passing tray like she belonged there. "I know this is awkward," she said, which made Tessa mutter, "You think?" But since Daniel couldn't find the courage, I will. I'm 12 weeks pregnant. A few people gasped. Someone dropped a fork. Elaine's face went so still it looked lacquered. Vanessa pulled an ultrasound printout from the envelope and held it up. And before anyone asks, yes, it's his. I turned to Daniel because there is a childish part of the human brain that still expects reality to correct itself if the right person speaks quickly enough. He didn't deny it. He ran a hand over his mouth and said, Sophia, let's not do this in front of everyone. Not it isn't true. Not she's lying. Not I'm sorry. I heard myself laugh once, sharp and wrong. Do what, Daniel? Your child? Vanessa stepped closer. He told me you two were basically done. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, but I'm not going to hide anymore. Tessa stood up, so fast her chair nearly tipped. Then maybe don't announce your affair pregnancy over somebody else's cake. And Daniel, still trying to control the room, said the sentence that ended any chance of private repair. Everyone, please. This is complicated. It wasn't complicated. It was public, calculated, and so familiar to him, he already had language for managing it. That was when I realized this humiliation had been professionally staged. I did not throw wine. I did not slap anyone. I did not give the room the breakdown it was bracing for. I took off my wedding ring, set it on the cake table beside the silver knife, and said, you can all keep eating if you want. I suddenly can't. Then I walked out before my body could betray me. The elevator ride down from the rooftop took maybe 40 seconds. My hands started shaking so violently I had to press them between my knees in the lobby. By the time I reached the parking garage, I was breathing in little broken pulls that made my chest ache. I sat in the driver's seat without turning the engine on and stared at my own face in the dark windshield. Mascara intact. Lipstick still there. That almost undid me more than anything. I looked like a woman whose life still made sense. Daniel called 7 times before I even backed out of the space. Then he texted, please answer. This is not what you think. A minute later, Vanessa is unstable. Then, I was trying to handle it. Then, unbelievably, don't make this worse by involving people. As if there were any version of worse left to protect. Tessa found me because I forgot she had my location from a road trip the year before. She slid into the passenger seat without asking and handed me napkins. Drive to my place or I'm driving you, she said. I shook my head. I can't even feel my hands. Good, she said. Then feel mine. You are not doing this alone. Daniel called again while she was speaking. I put him on speaker because some part of me needed to hear how he planned to explain a pregnant mistress at our anniversary. Soph, he started, Vanessa is emotional. She wasn't supposed to come tonight. I looked at Tessa. Supposed to. He paused. I mean, I didn't know she would do that. Do what, Daniel? Tell the truth before you could edit it? It's not that simple. Tessa leaned toward the phone. Funny how it was simple enough for an ultrasound. He hung up after that. At Tessa's apartment, I stood over her sink, trying not to vomit, when I remembered something small. Vanessa had known the exact moment the cake was coming out. She didn't interrupt cocktails or speeches. She waited for the symbolic center of the night. Only one person had given her that timing. By morning, humiliation had cooled into something more useful. I stopped replaying Vanessa's voice and started asking questions. Daniel had slept somewhere else. He texted, please let me come over and explain everything. I replied with the first honest sentence I had given him in months. No? Then I called in sick, made coffee I never drank, and opened the iPad we kept in the hall drawer. Daniel had once synced his messages there and forgotten. Or maybe he believed I never looked closely enough to notice. That assumption had held our marriage together longer than trust did. The thread with Vanessa went back 11 months. At first the messages were office flirty. You look dangerous today, only because you kept smiling at me from across the table. Then came dinners. Then hotel confirmations. Then a message from Daniel, timestamp 10:42 p.m. Use the other entrance tonight. Easier if anyone from my neighborhood is around. There were rideshare receipts in his email for nights. He told me he'd been driving to late client meetings. There were duplicate gift purchases. The same gold hoop earrings he gave me for Christmas, bought 2 weeks earlier in a different size. There were calendar entries labeled Marlin Dinner that matched a boutique hotel near the river. And there was one message from Vanessa that made my skin go cold. Are you sure she still doesn't know about us? The anniversary thing feels cruel. His reply came 3 minutes later. I'll handle Sophia. Don't improvise. I read that line 5 times, then forwarded it to myself. The worst part wasn't that the affair was long. It was how organized it was. Daniel hadn't made a mistake. He had maintained a second relationship with the same care I used to plan parent-teacher conferences. Blocks of time, backup explanations, receipts filed in the wrong account. Around noon, I checked our credit card statements against the messages. Hotel charges matched. So did restaurant bills, parking garages, and a florist on the west side that definitely wasn't mine. There was even a charge from Marlowe House 2 months earlier, on a date I had been at a grading retreat with my department. He had taken her to the restaurant where he proposed to me. He hadn't betrayed me once. He'd been scheduling it. If cheating had been the whole story, I might have stayed in the phase where grief still looked like confusion. It was the money that sharpened everything. Daniel and I kept separate checking accounts for everyday spending, but our savings lived in one joint account because that was where couples put grown-up plans. Emergency fund. House repairs. The IVF round we were still thinking about. I logged in that afternoon and saw 3 transfers I didn't recognize. For $1,860, for $1,860, and $4,860, each sent on the first of consecutive months to an LLC with a bland name, Oak Ridge Holdings. Nina Park, a lawyer Tessa knew through her firm, taught me my first useful post-betrayal lesson. If a name sounds boring, search it harder. Oak Ridge Holdings owned a furnished 2-bedroom condo 25 minutes from our house. The lease paperwork wasn't on our shared accounts, but the utility setup fee was. So it was a furniture receipt I had once mistaken for Daniel helping stage a client property. He wasn't staging anything. He was underwriting a second home. I went back through statements with a highlighter. Rent, internet, electric, a prenatal vitamin subscription billed to the joint card. A women's clinic charge under Vanessa's name from 6 weeks before the anniversary. The same month Daniel had sat at our kitchen island, rubbing my shoulder, saying maybe we should pause fertility stuff for a while because the stress wasn't helping. I had nodded then because I thought he meant us. He had meant him. When I confronted Elaine, asking whether Daniel had mentioned financial pressure, she was silent long enough that I knew the answer before she spoke. I knew he was helping someone, she said finally. I didn't know the full situation. Helping, I repeated. Sophia, don't twist my words. I laughed. Your son moved nearly $15,000 out of our savings and put another woman in a condo. What word would make you more comfortable? She exhaled through her nose. He said the marriage was complicated. It is amazing how often women protect men with grammar. Passive verbs. Soft nouns. Complicated. Difficult. Emotional. As if betrayal arrives like weather instead of being built, choice by choice. My anniversary wasn't the first milestone he'd stolen from me. The timeline broke me more than the ultrasound did. When you are first betrayed, your mind still bargains. Maybe it was recent. Maybe it started after the marriage was already limping. Maybe there was at least one sacred stretch of time left untouched. I sat at Tessa's dining table with my laptop, printed statements, and a legal pad, and I killed that fantasy line by line. Vanessa first appeared in Daniel's messages 11 months before the anniversary. The affair became physical by January. The condo lease started in March. The prenatal clinic billing appeared in July. None of that was survivable, but there was 1 month I kept circling because I couldn't make my brain accept it. April. In April, I had my miscarriage. It was at 10 weeks, the same number Vanessa used later when she announced she was 12. That spring still lived in my body as sounds before images. The bathroom towel cold under my knees. Daniel saying we're going now in a voice I mistook for love. The emergency room bracelet rubbing my wrist raw. After the procedure, I remember waking in recovery and seeing him typing on his phone with his head bent. He told me he was updating his office because he'd miss a meeting. He was texting Vanessa. I know that because the iPad thread showed it. 2:14 p.m. At the hospital. Don't panic. I'll come by later. Her reply. Do you want me to leave soup outside? His answer. That would be perfect. That night, after I came home bleeding, Daniel kissed my forehead and told me he had to run out for pharmacy stuff. He returned 90 minutes later with crackers, pain medication, and a lie I swallowed because grief makes you grateful for crumbs. The toll receipt from that same night placed him near the condo. I folded over so hard my ribs hurt. Tessa, across from me, reached for my arm and then stopped. There's more, I said, because there always was. 3 days after the miscarriage, Daniel had emailed our fertility clinic postponing our embryo consultation. Sophia needs time, he wrote. She's not emotionally ready to continue. I had never asked him to send that. Later that same afternoon, he charged lunch for two at a restaurant attached to Vanessa's medical building. The worst message was sent while I was still bleeding. Something in me went quiet after that. Not numb, not healed, just done performing injury for people who had mistaken it for weakness. I met Nina Park 2 days later in a glass-walled office above a bakery. She was one of those women who made calm look expensive. She listened without interrupting while I laid out screenshots, transfers, the condo address, the clinic email, the timeline around the miscarriage. When I finished, she stacked the papers into neat alignment and said, "Good. You documented before confronting. That gives you options." Nina walked me through practical steps in a voice so steady it kept my own from cracking. Copy every statement. Export every message with metadata. Freeze my credit. Change passwords on my personal email, school accounts, cloud storage, phone carrier, and payroll. Stop discussing money by phone. Don't warn him before paperwork is ready. Emotion makes people confess, she said, but preparation protects them from damage. I prepared. I opened a new checking account Daniel couldn't access and rerouted my paycheck there. I photographed the jewelry my grandmother left me because I suddenly didn't trust shared drawers. I backed up the iPad thread to 2 encrypted drives, one with Tessa and one in my classroom filing cabinet behind the Crucible unit plans. I changed the passcode on the garage entry, not because it was legally smart, Nina warned me, but because I needed one small thing in my life to answer only to me. Then I changed it back after she gave me the look lawyers reserve for clients trying to soothe pain with pettiness. Daniel kept circling. He texted paragraphs that shifted shape depending on the hour. Morning Daniel was remorseful. Afternoon Daniel was misunderstood. Evening Daniel was wounded that I was shutting him out when this is hard for both of us. I responded once, "Do not remove funds, records, or property from the house." That got his attention faster than tears ever had. He showed up the night in the driveway. "Soph," he said when I stepped onto the porch, "you're treating me like a criminal." I folded my arms. "Are you asking morally or financially?" For the first time, my silence belonged entirely to me. Daniel's next tactic was reconciliation theater. He asked to meet as adults somewhere neutral. He said he wanted to explain without Tessa poisoning the atmosphere. He said Vanessa was emotional, confused, and not part of his real life. He said the baby complicated matters, but didn't change what was fundamental between us. That word made my teeth hurt. I agreed to a meeting before Nina would have recommended it, but not impulsively. By then the petition was drafted, the financial records were copied, and the joint account had legal guardrails in motion. I chose Elaine's house for the conversation because Daniel could not fully perform innocence there. Elaine had arranged the room like a true summit. Tea service out, linen napkins, a plate of untouched shortbread. Tessa sat beside me in dark jeans and absolute contempt. Daniel gave her one irritated glance and then turned to me like a patient husband enduring interference. "Sophia," he said, sitting down carefully. "Thank you for agreeing to this." I didn't answer. Nina had told me silence forces people to fill it, and Daniel hated empty space. "I made mistakes," he continued. "Plural. I know that. But Vanessa believed things she wanted to believe. I never intended for any of this to become a spectacle." Elaine's eyes flicked toward him, sharp enough to cut paper. I slid a folder across the coffee table. "We'll get to intention. First, I want accuracy." He touched the folder, but didn't open it. "Do we really need an audit?" "Yes," I said. "Because you keep using words like mistakes and complicated when the correct phrases are leased condo, joint funds, and infidelity during miscarriage recovery." His whole body stilled. Tessa exhaled quietly beside me. Elaine set down her teacup without drinking. Then the doorbell rang. Daniel frowned. "Were you expecting someone?" I looked at him for a long moment, then stood and opened the front door myself. Vanessa was on the porch in a camel coat, one hand on the railing, confusion already turning to alarm. I had messaged her that morning from my own email, attaching one screenshot and one sentence. "If you want the truth, he's been selling both of us. Come at 6. When Daniel saw Vanessa in the doorway, his face finally betrayed him. Vanessa did not look triumphant in Elaine's foyer. She looked young. She still walked into my anniversary dinner and detonated herself across my life. But with her mascara too dark for daylight and her coat misbuttoned in a hurry, she looked less like a victorious mistress and more like someone who had just realized she'd boarded the wrong train. Daniel recovered first, because that was one of his gifts. "This is inappropriate," he said sharply. "Sophia, what are you doing?" "Comparing notes," I said. Vanessa's eyes moved between us. "You told me she wanted to know the truth." "I do," I said. "You just won't enjoy how much of it belongs to you too." Elaine stepped back from the room entirely, one hand braced on the console table, as if old breeding could outrun current reality. Tessa shut the front door and leaned against it, practical. Daniel tried to regain altitude. "Vanessa, you need to leave. This is a private family discussion." She gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "Family? Daniel, you told me you were separated. You said you were only staying in that house until finances were settled." I watched his jaw lock. There it was, the tiniest slip when two versions of the same life finally met. I handed Vanessa a copy of the condo lease first. "He signed this in March. Same month, he told me we should pause fertility treatment because he wanted to reduce stress at home." Her face changed. She looked down, then back at him. "You told me the condo was temporary because you were already leaving." "He was," Tessa said. "He just forgot to mention he kept coming back to my friend's bed and bank account." Daniel snapped. "Tessa, stay out of this." "No," I said quietly. "You don't get to moderate anymore." I passed over the clinic email next. Then a printed screenshot of Daniel's message from my hospital room. Then the transfer summary from our joint account. Vanessa read in silence, one hand moving off her stomach and onto the papers like she needed physical proof more than reassurance. Her confidence bled out in visible degrees. "You said," she whispered to him, "that you and Sophia hadn't tried for a baby in over a year." Daniel's eyes went flat. "I was trying to protect everyone." Vanessa stopped touching her stomach and finally looked scared. I had expected yelling. Instead, the exposure felt methodical, almost sterile, which made it more devastating. Elaine's sunroom had a wall-mounted television. Tessa connected my laptop while nobody spoke. The first thing on the screen was a timeline. Dates, screenshots, transfers, clinic charges, the condo lease, hotel receipts, ride records, all arranged in columns the way I organized lesson plans. I wanted no performance in it. Only sequence. Only proof. Daniel stood halfway between the sofa and the door, hands on his hips, watching his private life become a spreadsheet. "Tell me where any of it is wrong," I said. He tried the small life first. "Messages can be taken out of context." I clicked open the exported thread with timestamps and metadata. The hospital message glowed on the screen. The dinner plans at Marlowe House. The instruction not to improvise before my anniversary. The rent transfers matched to the joint account. The prenatal clinic billing address. The email postponing my fertility appointment without my permission. Vanessa made a sound then, half breath, half injury. "You told me she knew it was over." Daniel turned on her so fast. "Because it should have been. Sophia and I haven't been happy for years." That one landed harder than the affair. It was how he intended to narrate me out of my own marriage. Unhappy wives are easier to discard. They sound pre-abandoned. I looked at him and felt no impulse to rescue his dignity. "You used my miscarriage to buy time with another woman. You used our savings to furnish the place you kept her in. You let her announce your baby over the cake I ordered. And your defense is that you were unhappy?" His voice rose. "You think you're blameless? You made this house feel like a waiting room. Every conversation was fertility, school, schedules." Elaine cut him off. "Stop." He did not. Once the mask split, it tore quickly. He called Vanessa reckless, me controlling, Tessa toxic. He said no one appreciated the pressure he was under. He said men made mistakes. He said the condo was temporary support. With every sentence, he sounded less like a betrayed husband and more like what he was, a man enraged that documentation had outlived charm. That was the first time I watched his charm die in daylight. The fallout was less cinematic than people imagined and much more exhausting. Daniel moved out within a week, not because he became noble overnight, but because Nina filed quickly and the paper trail made bluster expensive. He tried once more to frame himself as reasonable, proposing we handle this privately if I agreed not to cite adultery or dissipation of marital assets. Nina translated that for me. He wants reputation protection in exchange for returning what he already took. We did not accept. The condo lease became useful in negotiations. So did the transfer records. So did the clinic email and the documented use of joint funds for someone else's housing and medical expenses. I learned more about marital accounting in 6 weeks than I had in 10 years of marriage. I learned that shame has paperwork. Vanessa did not stay with him. She sent exactly one message after the sunroom meeting. I'm sorry for what I did to you. I didn't know all of it. I stared at it for a long time and never replied. Some apologies arrived too late to be useful, but not too late to be true. Elaine surprised me once. She came to the house with a boxed hydrangea I did not want and said, I should have asked harder questions. It was not enough to repair anything, but it was the first sentence she had ever spoken to me that felt unvarnished. Tessa came over most nights that first month with takeout and bluntness. She changed my sheets when I couldn't stop smelling Daniel's cologne in the room. She sat beside me during therapy intake and squeezed my knee when I said miscarriage out loud to a stranger without falling apart. At school, I taught The Great Gatsby while secretly admiring the American tradition of discovering too late that charm and worth are not synonyms. I changed the locks after the temporary orders cleared. I repainted the bedroom because even the color had begun to feel like a concession. I reopened the department chair conversation I'd buried 2 years earlier. It turned out the job hadn't disappeared, only I had. There were still nights I cried in the shower, so the sound stayed private. Still mornings I woke reaching for somebody who had forfeited the right to be missed. But confusion was gone. Peace felt unfamiliar, which was how I knew it was real. If you had asked me before all this what humiliation does to a person, I would have said it makes you smaller. That was what I feared most on the anniversary night. Not just losing my husband, but becoming pitted, reduced, turned into a story other people told. What I learned instead is that humiliation only finishes the job if you accept somebody else's version of your role in it. For weeks, I thought the most painful image from that night would always be Vanessa holding up the ultrasound beside my anniversary cake. It wasn't. The image that stayed was my own hand, steady enough to place my ring on the table before I walked out. Some part of me had already chosen dignity over spectacle. Everything after that, the screenshots, the lawyer, the timelines, the meeting in Elaine's sunroom, was just my mind catching up to what my body knew. I also learned that peacekeeping is not the same as love. There is a kind of loyalty women get praised for that is really just well-behaved self-erasure. We call it patience. We call it understanding. We call it standing by your man while he's going through something. What we often mean is, stay quiet long enough for his discomfort to pass, even if yours never does. I will never confuse those things again. A few months after Daniel moved out, I took the department chair position. On my first late evening in the office, I rearranged the shelves for my students. I lined up paperback novels by color because no one was there to call it impractical. On the drive home, I realized I hadn't thought about Vanessa once all day. Not because I had forgiven anybody, because my life had finally stopped orbiting the wound. So this is the only advice I have. When the story breaks, document before you defend. Believe patterns more than apologies. Don't confuse tears with repair. And never let someone convince you that staying calm means staying still.